Picture this: the vast sun-scorched deserts of North Africa and the Middle East. The year is 1882. The British Army, a global superpower, faces a new kind of challenge. Their traditional cavalry, with magnificent horses, is struggling. The heat, the lack of water, the endless shifting sands, it's a nightmare for these animals. The solution? It's unconventional, a bit quirky, but utterly brilliant. They turn to the one creature perfectly designed for this environment, the camel. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're retrekking through a fascinating and often overlooked chapter of military history, the story of the British Camel Corps. It's a tale of adaptation, endurance, and the incredible bond between soldiers and their unlikely four-legged partners. Forget the charge of the Light Brigade. This is the story of the steady, relentless plod of the ships of the desert. Our story begins in Egypt. After occupying the country in 1882, the British found themselves entangled in the modest war in neighboring Sudan. The modest forces were mobile, elusive, and masters of the desert. British infantry columns were too slow, and their horses couldn't cope. Something had to change. The call went out for camels. The British weren't the first to think of this, of course. Napoleon had used a camel corps in his Egyptian campaign decades earlier, but the British were about to take it to a whole new level. They formed the Camel Corps as a branch of the Egyptian army, initially recruiting local experts who knew how to handle these notoriously stubborn but resilient animals. These weren't cavalry in the traditional sense. Soldiers didn't typically fight from camelback with sabers drawn. Instead, the camels were what we might call mounted infantry. They were a means of rapid transportation, allowing soldiers to cover vast distances across the desert with surprising speed in carrying all their essential supplies, water, ammunition, and food. Once they reached the battlefield, the soldiers would dismount, form a defensive square, and fight on foot, using their rifles with deadly efficiency. The camels would be led to a safe area to wait out the battle. The first major test for the Camel Corps came during the Gordon Relief Expedition of 1884 to 1885. A force was sent up the Nile to try and rescue Major General Charles Gordon, who was besieged in Khartoum. A special desert column was formed, composed of 4 regiments: the Guards, the Heavy, the Light, and the Mounted Infantry Camel Regiments. These weren't just colonial troops. These were elite British soldiers, drawn from prestigious regiments like the Grenadier Guard and the Life Guards. Imagine the scene: these prim and proper British soldiers, used to the green fields of England, now learning to ride a camel. It was not a graceful process. A camel's gait is a rolling, swaying motion that can make even the hardiest sailors seasick. The animals themselves could be grumpy, spitting, and loud. Winston Churchill, who later served with a different camel unit, famously described the camel as having the face of a sad sheep, the neck of a swan, the body of a cow, and the legs of a stork, and possessing a supercilious, sneering, pompous, patronizing expression. Yet, despite the difficulties, the men adapted. They learned the unique commands, the methods for loading and unloading their gear, and how to care for their animals in the harsh conditions. The bond they formed was crucial. A soldier's life depended on his camel's health and stamina. The Camel Corps proved its worth in battles like Abu Klea, where they dismounted and held off a massive modest charge, proving the effectiveness of their mounted infantry tactic. Though they arrived just 2 days too late to save Gordon and Khartoum, the expedition cemented the reputation of the Camel Corps. They had proven that a well-organized camel force could operate and fight effectively deep within the desert, something previously thought impossible for a modern army. The concept was so successful that it was refined and expanded. The Imperial Camel Corps Brigade was formed during the First World War, becoming a key asset in the Sinai and Palestine campaign against the Ottoman Empire. This time, it was a truly multinational force, consisting of British, Australian, New Zealander, and even Indian and Hong Kong Singaporean companies. These men became the eyes and ears of the army, conducting long-range patrols, reconnaissance missions, and daring raids deep behind enemy lines. They were desert ghosts. They could travel for days on minimal water, appearing where the enemy least expected them. One of their most famous allies was Lawrence of Arabia, who worked closely with the Camel Corps during the Arab Revolt, coordinating their movements with his Arab irregular forces. They played a vital role in key battles like the capture of Beersheba and the advance into Palestine. Their ability to outflank enemy positions by crossing supposedly impassable desert terrain was a game-changer. They weren't just transportation. They were a strategic weapon, tying down enemy troops and disrupting supply lines, paving the way for the main Allied advance. However, like all military innovations, the camel's time in the spotlight was destined to end. As the First World War drew to a close, the era of mechanization was dawning. Armored cars and light trucks began to prove they could cover the desert terrain even faster and more reliably than camels, without the need for food or rest. By 1919, the celebrated Imperial Camel Corps was officially disbanded. The legacy of the British Camel Corps, however, endures. It's a powerful example of military adaptation and ingenuity. It showed how an ancient form of transport could be integrated into modern warfare with devastating effect. The memorials to the Imperial Camel Corps, like the one on the Victoria Embankment in London, stand as a tribute not just to the soldiers who served, but also to the thousands of camels who carried them, endured with them, and ultimately helped them achieve victory in some of the most unforgiving landscapes on earth. It was a short-lived but glorious chapter in military history, a testament to the grit of the soldiers and the incredible resilience of their desert companions. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the desert sands of history. What do you think is the most interesting part of the Camel Corps story? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay curious.